Hello, my name is Steve Prince, and I'm the Director of Engagement at the Muscarelli Museum. Welcome to another exciting episode of Blacklite, presented to you by Black Art in America. Each episode, I will do a comparative analysis of two African American artists' artworks, focusing on design, content, and style. Today's featured artists are Ernie Barnes and Archibald Motley. Now, you see, I never got an opportunity to meet either one of these artists, but I sure can tell you that Ernie Barnes not only influenced me, but I'm sure he influenced countless of African-American artists coming up, seeing that really beautiful, elongated style that he created of his figures, stretching and moving with such power and grace throughout his compositions. I think many of us was also captivated by the TV show when we saw JJ go, "Dynamite!" on Good Times. I never forget, being a kid watching that show religiously, looking at that living room, waiting to see what new piece would be on that easel in the background. The artist Archibald Motley, I first encountered his work when I was in graduate school, and I actually took a trip to Washington, D.C., and I went to this gallery, and I walked in there, and I was blown away by the beautiful artwork created by his hands. And didn't even know at the time, but he was an artist that was born and raised in New Orleans and then left New Orleans when he was a little kid and moved to Chicago in that Great Migration. Ends up in Chicago and sees some of those same currents that come from the South that gets transported or transplanted into the North up in Chicago. And there he captures that spirit of the everyday in the African American community. The two works that I'm going to focus on today is a piece by Ernie Barnes called Room Full of Sisters. It is a painting that is made in acrylic that was made in 1994. And the work that I'm going to focus on is a painting by Archibald Motley entitled Getting Religion. He created this in 1948. Now, if you look at this painting and this composition, as I said about Archibald Motley, he had a true, keen understanding of how to capture the community. As you see the bustling, lively rhythms of the African American community all throughout this composition. What I love is that every single character has importance within this piece. There was nothing here by accident. As you can see, he had a true, beautiful sense of design and balance. His understanding of figure foreground, middle ground, and background, it is particularly well crafted throughout this composition, as he utilizes really simple colors of blue, green, and red. Now, there's some other colors that, of course, are sprinkled in throughout the composition, but those are the dominant ones that he carefully places throughout the composition to help move our eye throughout and help to keep that visual balance that I spoke of. Now, another element that is utilized inside the piece is the triangle, not only in terms as a visual anchor in terms of design, but he utilizes it also symbolically. If we look at the piece, Getting Religion, you see the people look like they're walking up and down the streets at nighttime, and there's like a parade that's processing down the streets as you see the trombone player and the horn player playing music, and a woman is tapping on a tambourine as they're moving throughout the space. But then there's this man standing upon a street corner orator, standing atop his little makeshift pulpit that reads underneath his feet, Jesus saves. His hands are clasped in a posture of prayer as his head angles back and looks towards the sky. It follows right along that roof line, which is in a triangular shape, which I'm sure alludes to the Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It hits right on that light, which is at the very top or the apex of our composition, juxtaposed to the windows, which are lit up on the inside. This one is a light that's for everyone to see. But if you look at all the people inside the composition, you will note that every single person's eyes cannot be read, except for the preacher. whose eyes are wide open, and who perhaps is looking at the light. And there's one other character inside this composition too that really is captivating, is the little child that is at his feet. He is the one child, or the one person inside the composition is actually paying attention to the preacher. His head is cocked back and looking at him. And it begs for us to wonder, is the child seeing the light too? Is the child getting religion? In the piece by Ernie Barnes, and it's called Room Full of Sisters in 1994. It is a beautiful composition, and you see his style on fleek. The way in which he's able to take those characters and stretch their bodies, minimize the scale of their hands, minimize the scale of their feet, but elongate the arms, and the way in which he takes the darkened tone in the middle of the figure or the core of the figure, and you see light is bathing the figures on the left and the right of their bodies, where you see the sense of light source coming from the left side of the compositional space, but he's also letting you know the light is bouncing and is dancing just like the figures are moving on these really beautiful diagonals, one leading to the next, as arms curve and move and hands angle, as fingers dangle inside of the space, as they almost sing in a very poetic way throughout the composition. He utilizes, again, like very much like Motley uses, the really simple color palette. He's got more or less the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue inside of this composition. Now, of course, he's got some other colors and tints and shades and so forth that are in here, but dominating throughout the composition, he utilizes color very much like Motley does by sprinkling them throughout the composition to help create the sense of balance. He uses, just like Motley uses in his composition, which is called a dense pack, where the figures are filling up the compositional space and you literally have to read each person. So therefore, he also says that each person has to be important. Each person is telling, like in a sense, their own story with their body. So I'm like wondering, when I look at this piece, I'm like, are they singing a song together? Girl, that's my song. Or are they, somebody just told a story about something and they all just falling out laughing in their own little way, arms swaying all in the air. You hear people probably screaming inside the room. It's just a joyous room, a room full of women enjoying each other's company, supporting and loving one another. But then there's some other subtle kinds of symbols that are embedded within the piece, and I'm sure that was Ernie Barnes was utilizing. Look at the woman on the right-hand side of the compositional space who has the blue dress with the calla lily right behind her. See, the calla lily has been utilized in art history for a very long time, and particularly in the realm of faith. The calla lily is a symbol of purity, a symbol of the Virgin Mary. And the color that was typically associated with the Virgin Mary is blue, as the woman stands right beside those flowers. Her arms are raised almost in the posture of praise. The other element I think that Ernie Barnes was playing off of too was, again, something that is central to the Black community, and that is that divine nine. Because if you count the figures, you'll note that there are 9 women in the room, perhaps symbolizing those fraternities and sororities that were created in the Black community and communities within the early 1900s. You see, when we think about both of these artists' works of Motley and that of Ernie Barnes, I mean, stylistically, you see that Barnes does a whole lot more like play with the figure in terms of the elongation and curving of the body and reduction of hands and feet. You see, Motley does some similar kind of thing in terms of the body, but he doesn't elongate so much as he truncates and he shortens the figure off and he makes them more rounded, more bulbous in their formation. Both of them have a keen understanding of each person having their importance and how they make their own narrative and how they add to the story. You know, as I go to that house, there's a mother on the porch looking out. Her child is sitting there, whereas the other child is across the street watching this orator speak. As you look at Barnes' piece, he also has a light shining bright inside there. The light becomes symbolic of that joy and that expression of women supporting and loving each other. I think ultimately, as Ernie Barnes shows you this interior composition of a house structure, you see Archibald Motley, he shows us the streets, the exterior of the African American community. In essence, both of them give us a really rounded view through their own time period. Motley during the whole Harlem Renaissance period, and then you have Ernie Barnes, whose work was really prevalent in the 70s into the 80s, speaking about the beauty, the power, and the majesty of the African American community. Thank you for allowing us to shine a black light on African American history and art. See you next time.